Welcome to today's episode of Polished. Today we're fortunate enough to be in New South Wales Parliament House, where we're joined by the Honourable Mark Banasiak, Member of the Legislative Council, and he is from the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party. Welcome, Mark. Thanks for joining us today. I know you've got quite a tight schedule.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Thanks for making the trip.
So thanks for squeezing us in as well. You've got a Polish background, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be here.
Yep.
And are you able to tell us about how your family, you mentioned that your family started in concentration camps in Germany and then found their way across there. Are you able to tell us about that journey for them?
Yeah, sure. So from what I've been able to understand from, tracking records and speaking to them while they were still alive, both my grandparents were in a forced labour camp in Germany, in Bamberg, and then at some point they met, we think in the translocation camp before they were being shipped to either the US or to Australia. And they met. My uncle was born on the boat over here. Originally they were going to go to the US because my grandmother had a cousin or an uncle somewhere in the US, but they couldn't identify where they were, so it was decided that they would be sent to Australia. And yeah, my uncle was born on the boat, and then my other uncle and my father were born over here. And while they generally immersed themselves in the local Polish culture, they went to the local Polish club. They really, for my father and his brothers, it was be the poster kids for assimilation. Put your head down, play rugby league, be good Aussie boys. Probably out of that fear of, what they just escaped and not wanting it to happen again or be targeted again. So they really just put their head down and, got on with, being Australian.
Good way to be. And then,
yeah.
Hard learning curve for a lot of different groups, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the sad part of that is, having to relearn that culture, because they never wanted to teach the language for some unknown reason, and generally didn't want to talk too much about what they'd experienced. So, trying to, rediscover that history, family-wise, and rediscover that culture has been part of my journey.
Interesting. And you grew up in Kiama, correct?
Kiama down on the south coast, so a lovely part of the world. Lived there for 17 years, and then moved up closer to Wollongong when I was going through uni. So,
and then you started your career as a teacher as well. How was that, fighting off, instead of fighting Germans, you're fighting kids, I guess? So.
Yeah, it's funny. I spent, I literally went straight from school to uni to then back into school, and lunchtime was still my favourite class. But
I can relate to that.
Yeah, look, it was interesting. I studied history and that sort of, European history around the wars was one of my favourite subjects. So I loved teaching it to the kids as well. Did probably about 16 years in education, all in low socioeconomic schools. Did about 6 years out in Western Sydney during the middle of the Cronulla riots, Redfern riots, Macquariefield riots. If there was a riot,
You were there?
I wasn't actually there at the riot, but I was, our kids were experiencing the aftershocks of it, definitely. It was a tough first 6 years, in that community in the southwest Sydney. But I think it probably strengthened my skills and ability to sort of deal with those tough kids and those kids going through tough times and actually still be able to reach them, and get them a good education. So
what's worse, the Lion's Den of Parliament House or the Lion's Den of Mount Druitt?
Look, the kids are just as badly behaved, but at least to this place I can say what I really think about them without getting into too much trouble. But no, look, it's different. But some of the skills I learnt at while I was teaching and being able to have difficult conversations with kids and their parents and still get a result and try and de-escalate things. Certainly skills that are transferable over to this job. It's leadership, but just in a different setting, really.
And tell us how you found your way into politics, because you're very, very passionate about what you do.
Yeah, well, I guess before I started getting into politics, I was playing soccer sort of semi-professionally locally, and I'd played in the National Youth League before it became the A League, and I ended up blowing out my ACL in one of the last games of the season, and was sort of moping around the house. And my brother-in-law, who was right into his shooting and hunting, was always trying to pressure me, hey, come on, mate, let's go out, rah, rah. And my wife was never really keen on it, and then she just said, I'll just take him. He's under my feet. He's been annoying. So, and then from that, got hooked ever since, and then started working my way through the associations for shooting clubs, and became the local president of a shooting association, and did that for about 10 years, and then just got identified by the party as someone that would be a good potential leader in the party. So, and then just worked my way up through the party structure. Essentially starting in the mailroom, handing out how to vote cards, then coordinating, local elections in terms of volunteers, all that logistics stuff that many people don't see. And then, got asked to join the committee, and then became the chair, and then got kicked out of the chair when they said, we want you to run for Parliament in 2019. So I'm the shortest chair in party history. But it's been a bit of a whirlwind journey, but I wouldn't change it.
And tell us, I think there's probably a bit of a stigma or maybe a misunderstanding as well in the Australian public generally. What sort of person is a member of your party, and what sort of person owns a gun? Because there's a lot of prominent people that have gun memberships, and tell us about that.
Yeah, I don't think you can actually probably characterise or boil it down into one type of person, because they come from all walks of life. There's doctors, there's nurses, there's teachers, there's obviously people that are more involved in the trades, construction. We do really, and across a wide range of cultures as well. We are really the all-inclusive, sport or pastime. Many European people grew up, had hunting as part of their culture when they were, over in their homeland, and that you can't necessarily just switch that off when you come to a new country, or even if you've grown up with it doing it here and you're born and bred Australian. It's not something you can necessarily just switch off, and it's hard to explain to someone if they haven't done it what the attraction or the appeal is. For me, it's just spending time out in the bush, and it's the quiet, it's the silence, it's the one time where your brain isn't running 100 miles an hour with all the day-to-day work stuff and home stuff. It's just a good circuit breaker, and I think everyone needs that in some sense. So,
and tell us about I know when I go and vote, and I vote below the line, and I look at like the Pirate Party, for example, I think, wouldn't that be cool if question time everyone was speaking like a pirate? Like I'll vote for them. Tell us about the way that minor parties influence the shape of Australian politics in the two-party preferred system.
Yeah, look, I think more and more people are getting sick of the two-party preferred system. A lot of people are seeing, the major parties as Coke versus Pepsi, and they are looking for different things. And so minor parties are becoming more prominent, and some of them, like ours, started, with a reasonably narrow focus. We were born out, obviously, the reforms in 1995 and 96, but we've been in this place for 30 years now, and obviously we've grown the brand, grown the constituency group. So we're not just talking about firearms issues. We're talking about obviously fishing. We're talking about environmental. We're talking about agriculture. We're talking about small business. There's nothing that we generally don't weigh in on. If it's good for our constituents, we'll support it. If it's not good for our constituents, then we'll fight against it, no matter what the general topic is. So I think more and more people are looking to minor parties, and that forces the major parties to not be so pig-headed and stubborn about trying to ram through legislation when they've got other parties they've got to deal with to try and get that legislation passed. You can get things, I guess, legislation mellowed or changed, and I think that's where we come to the forefront, is our ability to do that and negotiate and get sensible changes.
And on that note, tell us about a normal Christmas for you. Like you're actually very, very busy over that period, because whoever the government of the day is, one of their tricks, as you know, is to ram through legislation while we're all watching Boxing Day Test and eating Christmas ham. Yeah.
Look, normally there's about a week around Christmas, so sort of a couple of days before Christmas and into New Year, where no one wants to talk to a politician, which is sort of great. You get that sort of week at home with your family. But obviously this year was a little bit different. The government tried to ram through firearms legislation on Christmas Eve. We finished at 3-ish in the morning on Christmas Eve, and that was sort of tough, because then you had all the phone calls and emails and text messages from constituents all the way through Christmas and into the new year, and even into now, wanting to know what it meant for them. And because the legislation was so poorly drafted, you can't give them a lot of answers or comfort. It's generally busy, but this year was a bit tougher. I did take Christmas Day and New Year's Day off, but that didn't mean the phone calls and the emails weren't coming. I chose not to answer them.
You've got to have a rest too.
Yeah, that's it.
And what do you find when you're talking about to your constituents? Is there an understanding in the general public about how important farmers are from a supply chain perspective, and keeping us all fed, watered, keeping everything in Coles and Woolies?
Yeah, look, I think it's people are becoming more aware of that. I think there still is that city regional disconnect for some people. They've never really experienced empty shelves in a supermarket before, and never really understood how it gets from the farm to the shops, and what the farmer has to go through. All the costs that are involved in getting it from there to the shops. And all the red tape and rigmarole that they have to go through, to essentially put food on the table. And it's a big export industry too, our aid industry. So it's important not only to feed the country, but also for economic prosperity.
And you touched on it a little bit, things like when they changed the live export laws, things like changing the gun laws after Bondi. What effect does that have on your life, your constituents, the country in general?
Well, it obviously, the first thing, it just raises their blood pressure and their stress levels. With the live export, it raises concerns about whether the New South Wales sheep market will get flooded with stock that they can't get rid of out of WA, and then what that does to the market in New South Wales. It's very price sensitive, the sale yards in New South Wales, so it could have a dramatic effect. But then you look at the firearm laws, a huge problem farmers are dealing with at the moment are pests. The wild pigs are just out of control, and a lot of the tools that they were using to deal with these pigs and try and get on top of them are the things that may be recategorised, and they won't be allowed to utilise as primary producers. So they're obviously stressed by it all. And farmers alone can't do it themselves in terms of managing pests. That's why they ask recreational hunters to come onto their property and give them a hand, because they've got to run their farm. They can't be standing there all day, all night, trying to shoot, feral animals. That's why they call us in to give them a hand. And if we can't do it because we're restricted, in terms of the types of firearms we can own and utilise, then it's hurting them more than anyone. But then it's hurting the country in general. If they can't get on top of this pest problem, it's going to have severe impact, on getting that food to people's plates.
Don't want to end up with another myxomatosis either. So.
No, that's right. We know some of these animals are vectors for disease. Pigs with brucellosis and rabbits, etc. And we don't necessarily also want to get to a point where our only option is to poison, the landscape, because that has issues on our native wildlife and the environment in general. We don't need some of those chemicals running into our waterways, and which then gets used to water our crops. It's not the ideal solution.
And last question, because I know you've got to go. Nuclear energy. I know you're involved in that. Where do you see that heading?
It's hard to tell. We do really need one of the major parties to shift their view or be more forthcoming in processing their view forward. Our party's fairly technology agnostic. We think nuclear should be in the discussion, should be in the mix. It's not going to take any longer than what our renewable establishment of solar farms and wind farms and transmission lines is going to do. I think people need to get past this argument of what happened in the past with nuclear. The technology on nuclear has moved, just like the technology in everything else has moved, and you have these essentially inherently safe small modular nuclear reactors that can be put on to where our existing power plants are and essentially just plug in. That's a very simple way of putting it, but it will take time to construct, but it should be in the mix. You see a lot of European countries are now waking up to that fact that they can't just rely on renewables. Something has to be done to deal with that baseload power question.
Is there any interest from a nuclear perspective on thorium? Because it's the renewable of the nuclear energy, and you can't make bombs out of it. Is there any appetite for that?
Oh, look, I think there possibly could be, but I think we've still got to get past that stigma of nuclear. I think people are still stuck in the past in terms of what happened, with Chernobyl, with Fukushima, and they see it as this this evil element that sits under the earth, that stupidly we can explore for, but we can't actually dig up. And if we accidentally dig it up, then we have to put it rebury it somewhere.
South Australia again.
South Australia. It's just it's silly that we have that resource and we're not utilising it.
Okay, and thank you for your time. Before we get harassed by parliamentary security, we better let you go.
Yeah, no problems at all.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Cheers.